All right, today we are going to start chapter 16 on Russia and the Western Republics. Actually, I got to go back a slide here to start, sorry. Let this open up here. So today with chapter 16, we're taking a look at the human geography of Russia and also the republics, Central America, Transcaucasia. Same places we talked about in chapter 15. Now we're going to talk more about the features of human geography in all three subregions of Russia and the republic. But like I said, today we're starting section 1, Russia and the Western Republics. This picture right here is actually St. Basil's Cathedral. It's a very famous building in Moscow. You can see the architecture here it's incredibly cool. And then the vocabulary down here is on the bottom. But kind of start with, I'm going to read you a human's perspective right out of our textbook. It says, from early in the 1500s, the Russian leader Ivan the Great put an end to 2 centuries of foreign rule in his homeland. Russia then entered a period of explosive growth, and from its center in Moscow, Russia, they expanded at a rate of about 55 square miles a day for the next 4 centuries. During the expansion, Russians made so much progress toward the east they swallowed up a future U.S. state, Alaska. Russia had taken control of the territory by the late 18th century, but did not sell it to the United States until 1867. So moving on, our learning targets today, by the time we're all said and done with our notes, we should be able to summarize the history of Russia. Now, granted, we're taking what takes Mr. Johnson a whole semester, we're going to do in 15 minutes. So it's a very fast summarizing of the history of Russia. You should also be able to explain how the former Soviet Union, or USSR, command economy worked. You should be able to describe the cultural background and achievements of Russia and the Western republics. And finally, you should be able to describe ways in which Russian life has changed and how it's also remained the same. So, now, Russia's growth had very lasting effects on nearby lands and peoples. You can see these effects even today in the republics to its west, Belarus, Moldova, Ukraine, and what's known as the Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But Russian expansion not only affected its neighbors, it also had an important impact on the entire world's political geography. The Russian state began in the region between the Baltic and Black Seas, and in the 9th century, Vikings from Scandinavia came to the region to take advantage of the river trade between the two seas. They established a settlement near what is now Kiev, a city near the Dnieper River. In time, the Vikings adopted the customs of the local Slavic population, and soon the settlement began to expand. Expansion was halted in the 13th century with the arrival of invaders from Mongolia called Tatars. The ferocity of those Mongol warriors is legendary. It is said that, quote, like molten lava, they destroyed everything in their path, end quote. The Tatars sacked Kiev between 1237 and 1240. The Mongols controlled the region until the 1500s, when Ivan the Great, the powerful prince of Moscow, put an end to their rule. Russia continued once again to expand to the east, and by the end of the 17th century, it had built an empire that extended to the Pacific Ocean. As the leaders of Russia added more territory to their empire, they also added more people. Many of these people belonged to different ethnic groups, spoke different languages, and practiced different religions. Now, Russia's territorial growth was very rapid, but its progress in other ways was very less impressive. Russian science and technology lagged behind that of its European rivals. Peter the Great, who was Tsar, or Emperor, of Russia from 1682 to 1725, tried to change this. For example, he moved Russia's capital from Moscow to a city on the Baltic Sea. The new capital, named St. Petersburg, provided direct access by sea to Western Europe. Russians called St. Petersburg their window to the West. Peter the Great made very good strides toward modernizing Russia, but the empire continued to trail behind the West. While the Industrial Revolution swept over many Western European countries in the first half of the 1800s, Russia didn't even begin to industrialize until the end of the century. When industry did come to Russia, it resulted in harsh working conditions, low wages, and other hardships. These problems contributed to the people's anger at the czars who ruled Russia. Now, during World War I, between 1914 and 1918, the Russian people's anger exploded into revolution. In 1917, the Russian Revolution occurred, which ended the rule of the czars. The Russian Communist Party, led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, or V.I. Lenin, took control of the government. The party also took charge of the region's economy and gave communist leaders control over all important economic decisions. By 1922, the Communist Party had organized the different peoples absorbed during the centuries of Russia's imperial expansion. This new nation was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR for short. The leaders of the Soviet Union ruled the nation from its new capital in Moscow. By the time World War II broke out in 1939, Joseph Stalin had taken over the leadership of the USSR. In 1941, he led the Soviet Union in the fight against Nazi Germany. However, as the war dragged on, relations between the Soviet Union and its allies, including the United States, began to worsen. After the war, Stalin installed pro-Soviet governments in the Eastern European countries that his armies had liberated from Germany. U.S. leaders feared that a new stage of Russian expansion was beginning and that Stalin would spread communism all over the globe. By the late 1940s, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union led to conflict. Diplomats called this conflict the Cold War because it never grew into open warfare between the two nations. The rivalry between the two superpowers continued in the mid-1980s. At that time, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev started to give more economic and political freedom to the Soviet people. This began a process that led to the collapse of the communist government in the Soviet Union in 1991, and finally, the end of the Cold War. Now, to kind of interject my own personal history into this, I was in first grade when this happened, and I remember it like it was yesterday. This was a very, very big deal. Down here in the bottom right corner, you can see President Reagan, Ronald Reagan. He's holding a speech at Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, Germany. And he's telling Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, to knock down the Berlin Wall and to reunite Germany. So he was facing some pretty intense pressure from the rest of the world. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the region was divided into 15 independent republics. Of these, Russia, formerly known as the Russian Federation, is the largest and most powerful. Today, Russia has a popularly elected president. Its legislature, the Federal Assembly, is divided into two chambers, the Federation Council and the State Duma. The communists who overthrew Tsarist Russia in 1917 had strong ideas about the future. When they put their ideas into practice, they drastically transformed the economic geography of the region. The communists had been inspired by the work of Karl Marx, who was a German philosopher who had examined the history of economic systems. Marx believed that the capitalist system was doomed because it concentrated wealth in the hands of a few and left everyone else in poverty. He predicted that a communist system would replace capitalism, and in a communist society, he argued, citizens would own property together and everyone would share the wealth. So to move their society towards communism, Soviet leaders adopted a command economy, one in which the central government makes all important economic decisions. The government took control of the major sources of the state's wealth, including land, mines, factories, banks, and transportation systems. Government planners decided what products factories would manufacture, what crops farms would grow, and even what prices merchants would charge for their goods. So rapid industrialization became a major goal of Soviet planning. Even farming became an industry under Stalin. The Soviet government created enormous collective farms on which large teams of laborers were gathered to work together. People were moved to farms by the thousands, and by 1939, nearly 9 out of 10 farms were collectives. The Soviets had firmly established their power over the countryside. Although industrial and agricultural production increased, the region's people had to make great sacrifices for this rapid transformation. Millions of citizens starved to death in famines caused in part by the creation of collective farms. Those who survived soon realized that only a small number of individuals had benefited from the economic changes. Many people tried to do something about this betrayal, but at great risk. Under Stalin's rule, the police swiftly punished any form of protest, and some historians estimate that Stalin was responsible for the deaths of more than 14 million people. Since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, leaders in Russia and the republics have tried to reduce the state's monopoly on economic power and return some control to private individuals and businesses. Now, Russia and the Western republics faced hard times under the czars and the communists, but these leaders could not destroy the cultural and spiritual traditions of the region's people. The region has a rich variety of ethnic groups because of the many people absorbed during the centuries of Russian expansion. Russia has the greatest ethnic diversity of the region's republics. Russians make up the largest ethnic group there with about 80% of the total. But nearly 70% other peoples live in Russia, including Finnish, Turkic, and Mongolian people. Russia and the Western republics are also home to a great number of religions. Most Russians follow Orthodox Christianity, a religion Russia adopted in the 10th century. But the region is home to many other religions, including Buddhism and Islam. Judaism, Jewish people, it's also an important religion in the region. However, persecution has led large numbers of Jews to emigrate, especially to Israel and the United States. So religion and art are closely related in Russia and the Western republics. The art and architecture of Orthodox Christian churches, for example, are among the region's earliest artistic achievements. Even today, citizens adore the beautiful onion-shaped domes and the icons, images of sacred Christians, that ornament the churches. Regional culture went through great change after Peter the Great began to promote communication with Western Europe. As Russian artists combined artistic ideas from the West with their own experiences, we really, truly went through a golden period of culture in Russia. In the 18th and 19th centuries, audiences around the world marveled at the work of writers such as Alexander Pushkin and Fyodor Dostoevsky, and their dramatic scenes and colorful psychological studies gave an important portrait of Tsarist Russia. We also have great composers like Peter Tchaikovsky, Igor Stravinsky. They also earned worldwide attention, as did the Russian ballet. Russian ballet companies such as the Kirov and Bolshoi are famous for producing magnificent dancers and also known for having very creative choreographers. Art underwent another major change after the Communist Party began to outlaw artists who did not work in the official style. This style, called socialist realism, promoted Soviet ideals by optimistically showing citizens working to create a socialist society. In spite of the censorship, many artists took great risks to continue producing original work. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, artistic expression has begun to gain strength. So since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the region is more open to influence of other countries, especially those in the West. At the same time, the region's people continue to honor their traditions and work hard to preserve them. The region's people, especially in larger cities, have begun to enjoy more social and cultural opportunities. Large cities such as Moscow and St. Petersburg now resemble major cities in the West. City dwellers can read books, magazines, and newspapers from all over the world, and they're able to keep up with new movies, music, and clothing trends. They can also experience a wide variety of food and cuisine. Although the variety of social and cultural opportunities has increased, native traditions have survived. For example, in spite of the many cuisines now available in Russian cities, many Russians still favor their traditional foods. Many of the foods, like rye bread, reflect the large crops of grain produced on the region's steppes. Kasha is another popular food made from grain. It's cooked and eaten with butter, and even Russia's national drink, vodka, is made from rye or wheat grains. And only a quarter of Russia's population lives in rural areas. Even so, many Russians cherish the nation's countryside. Nearly 30% of the population own homes in the country where they spend weekends and vacations. These homes, called dakas, are usually small, plain houses and often have gardens in which to grow vegetables. One of the customs that Russians enjoy both in the countryside and the cities is visiting a banya. A banya is a bathhouse in which Russians perform a cleaning ritual that combines a dry sauna, steam bath, and often a plunge into cold water. Russians begin the ritual by warming up in a sauna heated around 200 degrees. They then move into a steam room where they use birch twigs to ease the muscles and perfume the body. After spending time in the steam room, many bathers plunge into an icy cold pool, which might be a hole cut in the ice of a river or a lake. The ice bath is followed by a hot tea, and the process is repeated, so a visit to the banya can sometimes last for 2 to 3 hours. The preservation of such customs and traditions by the Russian people has played a very important role since the fall of the Soviet Union, and has helped to make the change from the isolated Soviet past to the more open society of the present less difficult. That will conclude 16.1.